Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Right Now on WILI 1400 and 95.3. It is Thursday, June 25th. My name is Brian Saucier. I am filling in for Chris Reddy for the first half of this show. Chris will be here at half past. I was fortunate enough to join Chris's show about a month ago. I'm happy to be back. Let me introduce myself briefly. I am the candidate for the Republican Party for District, 49 is the local district for Windham for State House Rep. I'm excited to have the opportunity to represent the town of Windham, to bring my viewpoints into the conversation in our town. I'm going to talk to you today about what some of the more hot ticket items that from our last legislative session. A few bill numbers. I guess those don't really matter. I want to talk about gun control. That was a big one that passed in June or May. I'm going to talk about vaccines. I'm going to talk about homeschooling. Maybe we'll get to low-income housing. I think the damage in that bill was done last year, in the last session, if I believe. So, I don't know, let's start with gun control. You guys can learn a little bit about me as I talk through some of these issues. So, rewind the clock about 12 years or so, and Sandy Hook, a very terrible event that took place, launched a whole national conversation on gun control. And that was the event that pushed me into some awareness of what is going on in the political sphere and what is going on in our world more broadly. And maybe I had the same question then that a lot of you may be having now of why on earth would Hartford decide that it is no longer legal to manufacture and sell and ultimately own in time once all of the guns that are in circulation now break, move out, disappear. Why is it no longer okay to purchase a regular old handgun in the state of Connecticut? That's a good question. I remember asking that question for a long time after in 2012 and then into 2013 legislative session. I remember asking this question: how can anything possibly be made better around the instances of violence in our state, in our society, in our community by disarming or otherwise making it harder for me at the time? I had three kids, I guess, in 2013. I had 3 kids in 2013. And I spent the whole first half of that year thinking about how is it going to be easier for me to defend my family? This is a rural town. I live at the edge of town. This whole town is essentially a rural town. And the police are a long ways away. Troop K in Colchester is going to take half an hour to get to my house. So any defense that I need to provide for my family, whether it be from a two-legged attacker or a four-legged attacker of various kinds, I'm going to have to provide that myself. And why would the government want to make it harder for me to do that? I was innocent 12 years ago in terms of, not really understanding some of the motivations that circulate amongst our leadership. But I imagine there's a lot of people out there right now today too asking the question of why the heck are they doing this? Why is it now going to become more challenging? I'm going to have less options. I happen to like a regular old handgun that, in theory, could be converted to shoot differently. And these handguns, there are hundreds of thousands, if not millions of them in circulation in this state right now. And there are thousands of people walking around our community right now in Windham carrying these guns. And there's a question of all of a sudden you can't buy them. I don't know when it goes into effect, next year maybe or something, but it's coming. And the short answer to that question is, and this is a question throughout history, is that slaves are not allowed to own guns. Tyrants do not want the people that they hold underneath them to be able to defend themselves. Now, that might sound hyperbolic or extreme, but that sentiment has been proven over and over and over and over again throughout history. And I could hear the objections now around we don't want to disarm anybody. We just want to institute common sense safety measures. And all those talking points, if you step back and look at them from a year out, 10 years out, 50 feet out, any amount of distance, you see a trajectory. And what has been the trajectory in Connecticut for the last, who knows when, the gun control law started in Connecticut with some very innocent-sounding permitting process, I think back in the 50s and 60s. And what has the trajectory been very steadily since then? More and more and more and more control, less and less and less options for an average person out there to defend themselves. Connecticut used to be the firearms manufacturing capital of the world. And what do we have left in that sector? A tenth of what it used to be, if that. And you can track trajectories if you look long enough. There are people in this state who will not be satisfied until we follow the path of the UK or Australia, where essentially all modern firearms are banned. And yes, you could go get a musket as a museum piece, but you probably have to have that registered too. So that's sort of an intro of where I'm coming from. Like I said, the gun control mayhem in 2013 was my initiation into the political world. And what's changed? Not much. They take another bite out of the common average person's ability in this state to be able to defend themselves. So that's just one piece of the damage that was done in this past legislative session to the ability of citizens to just live an everyday normal life on their own terms without being bothered by the state. And that is a segue into an overall theme that I want to paint for my campaign. Is I know I have to I got to talk about specific issues if I want to connect with people. I got to come up with simple ideas and simple concepts, but I've got some time now to explain some longer topics that I won't get a chance to if I'm just meeting somebody for 2 seconds on the street. So gun control is a great segue into the broader theme that I want to project throughout my campaign. As I mentioned in my intro and the show last month with Chris, I'm a father, I'm a husband, I have a regular job. But none of that, all of that are secondary to the fact that I am a Christian, and my Christian faith stands above all those other aspects of who I am. So I'm going to read a single verse for you. This is Romans 13, verse 3. For rulers are not a terror to good conduct, but to bad. This is from a section about, in the New Testament, the Apostle Paul is writing about how Christians, newly made at the time, how they should relate to the civil government. And he is outlaying in one verse one of the most fundamental aspects of how Christians are supposed to understand the purpose of civil government. I'll read this again. Rulers are a terror to good conduct, are not a terror to good conduct, but to bad. In other translations, it says, that rulers are to be a terror to evil. That is the purpose of the civil government. It is to be a terror to evil and to establish justice. So, connecting this back to gun control, what does gun control achieve? It disarms good people. Is it a terror to bad people? Of course not. It's quite the opposite. By definition, criminals do not obey gun laws. Criminals are not concerned with, am I allowed to own a Glock? Okay, could this semi-automatic handgun be converted to fire in a different manner? Do they ask themselves these questions? Of course not. So this concept of the civil government is supposed to uphold justice and be a terror to evil conduct. That's the fundamental the fundamental direction that a Christian is supposed to understand and expect the civil government to follow. And gun control is just one of the clearest examples of where the government is doing exactly the opposite. Let's jump in to a few other topics. Homeschooling and vaccines. I'll be honest with you, I didn't really follow the vaccine controversy all that closely. Didn't affect me as much as the homeschooling one, which I did follow closely, but they follow a very similar thread. Basically, there's a short list of reasons that people move to Connecticut. A short list of political reasons, I should say. Connecticut is a beautiful and lovely state, and I've lived here my whole life, and that's why I'm fighting for it. But on the political front, there was a short list of reasons to move to Connecticut. Homeschooling, freedom, and the fact that Connecticut was more or less left homeschooling families alone, that was one of the items on the short list of reasons to move to Connecticut. That was completely wiped off the map in May of this year. That was a highly controversial bill. Of course, homeschooling is a growing community, but still very much a minority. So, what do bullies do? They do whatever they think they can get away with people that they feel have no power, have no control. So, homeschooling is a very vocal minority, but it's still very much a minority. And I've been to so many public hearings over the years that I'm really no longer interested in going to them. The homeschooling ones were the same effect as the gun control ones over the years, where thousands and thousands and thousands of people will show up and say, "Don't do this, don't do this, don't do this. We don't want this, we don't want this, we don't want this." They'll trot out a few experts, they'll trot out a few friends, they'll trot out a few who the heck knows who they are, but they'll get testimony on the order of like 1,000 to 1. Of we don't want this. And what happens? Well, say we know better. We know better than you parents. We know better than what your children need for education. We know better than what you've been doing with your family for 10 years, 15 years, 20 years. Somebody in Hartford or somebody in the local town, they know better than parents. And this is another one where it's a head scratcher, right? You have to say, okay, the gun control thing, like why do they want to make it harder to own a handgun? Why do they want to interfere with homeschooling families? I know for a fact that there are, you could count them on one hand if there's anybody at all in the town of Windham that went to that hearing and said, I want to see more oversight and more control over homeschooling families. There was probably somewhere close to 0 people in the town of Windham held that position. Yet here we are. That's the direction we're heading. So I want to relate this back again to the theme that I'm gonna relate everything to because that's what it means to me to be a Christian, is to see everything through a Christian worldview. The family is the foundational unit of civilization. Always has been, always will be. The family is the first institution that God created. The second institution that he created was marriage, and the two of them are closely tied together. A husband and a wife, a mother and a father come together and multiply and create the family. And in Scripture and our tradition, Connecticut was an explicitly Christian state for 329 years, from 1636 to 1965, an explicitly and undeniably Christian society. And that Christian society understood the simple and very well-established concept that education is the responsibility of parents. It is the parents' duty to see that a child is brought up to know and love Jesus Christ. And it is also their duty to educate them in the manner they see fit. And there's nothing wrong with parents delegating that authority to a teacher of various in any setting. There's nothing wrong with a a parent sending their children off to a school to be educated, but it is the parent's responsibility from beginning to end for that child's education. Somebody or a group of people in Hartford apparently know better, and they apparently think otherwise. And this bill that was passed, it's the way that this works is they take small bites, right? They take little bites, just like they've done with gun control for the last 60 years. So, the bite that was taken, which was significant for homeschooling, is, if a child is already enrolled in a public school system and a parent decides for whatever reason that they are going to homeschool, they have to more or less get the approval from the town. It's just, this is also another classic move that Hartford decides something and then foists it onto the town to deal with, whether the town wants it or not. But the town is going to have to then say, okay, we've done some DCF background check, negating the whole concept of like innocent until proven guilty. We're going to perform some kind of check on this family, and then we're going to determine whether or not they can withdraw their child to homeschool. So, there's the basic fundamental questions here to ask that follow out of the situations, like who do the children, who has the ultimate authority for these children? Do these children ultimately belong to the state, or do parents have true authority over their children? The Christian perspective is very clear on that. Now, it doesn't mean that their authority is limitless, but their authority is ultimate. Their authority is firmly established. And now, the state just took a big bite out of that. And then in a similar vein, right, again, I didn't really follow this closely, but there was another vaccine controversy this year. And I know like religious exemptions related to the whole COVID disaster, that changed several years back, in the midst of all of the COVID mania, where religious exemptions were removed, and there was yet another bite out of parental and personal autonomy related to vaccines. And it's just there's a theme here, right? There's a theme that you can conclude here, and that theme is experts somewhere far away just know better than you. So you should just sit down and shut up and do what they tell you to do. That's the theme. So those are three sort of narrow applications that I want to highlight, and I want to anticipate a couple of objections. Right, that it's perfectly understandable for given the culture and the way it's gone for the last several decades. If someone is talking about our civil government needs to account for Christian traditions and biblical concepts, immediately someone's going to say, well, what about the separation of church and state? Or what about freedom of religion? Or you can't legislate morality. All of these things that have been, these are kind of the knee-jerk instinctive responses that have been trained into us for a very long time. And I want to speak to those, and that's going to be some of the stuff I'm going to cover on additional calls. If I'm fortunate enough to be back sitting in front of this microphone, I'm going to share with you some of the answers to those objections. Welcome, Chris.
Hi, how's it going?
Excellent.
Glad I could make it there. Thank you for filling in for me for a little while. I had a presentation to make over in the town of Scotland. We had a 250th celebration flag and bunting that we presented to the town to help decorate. So I appreciate you filling in for the first half of the show there. You did a great job. I was listening on the way in.
Happy to be here. Thanks for having me, Chris.
Yeah, of course. One thing that I do want to add to your conversation about Second Amendment and gun control that I was listening to on the way in, one of the things that I found out just in the past few months in kind of researching some information about this is that the one thing that Connecticut really does a very bad job on is enforcing the current laws that we have right now. If you look historically back in like the past 7 to 8 years, about 65% of the crimes that involved gun usage, those gun charges were dropped. if we do not have a way to properly enforce the laws that we have against people that are committing bad acts and violent acts with guns, then we really are not doing anything to protect, like you said, the actual people who are law-abiding and good citizens who do simply want a way to protect themselves from the bad element. So the stuff that you said I really liked listening to on the way in. I just wanted to add that little bit in there because we see this, and you're absolutely right that criminals are not going to obey the laws. They're not going to say, well, this is a gun that's no longer allowed in Connecticut. They don't care. They don't care about it at all. People who have been told by the court systems, you are not allowed to possess a gun, they don't care. They still possess it. They still commit crimes with it. We see it over and over again. And we're even seeing it now affecting a very young demographic. When I see 15 and 16 and 17-year-olds caught in possession of a gun or in a stolen car with a stolen gun in it, I got to be concerned that there's a real disconnect when someone that young is getting into that much trouble. So.
Yeah, that's not enforcing laws on the books is a theme that runs far wider than just gun control. That's a particularly ugly example. But there's too many laws, and they're too complicated, and they're too messy. They're too onerous. They lack like basic principles of justice, and it just leads to a mess upon mess upon mess upon mess. But you're absolutely right about that's one of like the classic failures of in this whole gun control debate is let's enforce the laws we already have. And that hasn't happened in decades.
Yeah, and it's always been one of those things that at the time that they're arguing between prosecutors and defense attorneys in the court system and saying, okay, how are we going to work out some sort of an acceptable plea here? Because as we know, litigation always comes down to some sort of a compromise and what's going to happen there. Even in the criminal justice system, it happens. And when we have a situation where somebody commits very serious crimes with a gun, and then we take that element that has allowed them to be so aggressive and have such an overwhelming, I'm going to say, ability to create fear and intimidation in their victim by having a firearm. We can't just simply say, well, we're going to let that charge go. There's some cases where we cannot have this as part of the plea bargain and part of the situation that does not make our community safer. I mean, clearly, we still have a problem. There's latest reports are showing that there has been a decrease in violent crime in Connecticut. I have not dug deep into the data yet to read this. I simply read the article that they posted in the past few days saying that violent crimes are down in Connecticut. But again, one thing that I said in 2024, and I'm going to repeat it again, I don't think that the rate of crime is down. I think the prosecution of crime is down in Connecticut.
Absolutely.
1 minute?
No, we can go to break now.
Okay, well, this has been the first half of Right Now and hosted by Brian Saucier today. This is 95.3 FM, 1400 AM, WILI. We'll be back after the break. Welcome back to Right Now. I'm Chris Reddy. I am back in the studio for the second half of our show here. Had a guest host, Brian Saucier, the candidate for the state rep seat for the town of Windham, who was nice enough to fill in for me during the first segment of our show here on 95.3 FM, WILI. I was tied up presenting a flag and flag bunting to the town of Scotland from our town committee to celebrate the 250th birthday of America coming up here. And we do have a couple of events that I do want to touch on in the next couple of weeks coming up that people who are tuned in to local politics should be paying attention to. Very clearly, we have a huge event on the 4th of July, being the Boombox Parade right here in downtown Willimantic that everybody's looking forward to. I've been involved in the parade for a couple of years now, and it's always a great time, great turnout, lots of really good enthusiasm, and a really good event for the town of Willimantic and Windham. Nothing else like it anywhere around. We're talking about the Boombox Parade, so make sure you come out and join us there on the 4th of July, followed by Windham's 250th celebration, which will be at Gilson Square in the Shabu stage.
I think it's 350 for Windham. The 350 years for Wyndham being a... Oh, maybe that's something different.
Yes.
Okay, my bad.
Yeah, so on the 4th, that's okay, man. So on the 4th of July, it is the 250th celebration, and that's something that actually was talked about on Dennis O'Brien's show last week. I listened to that, and he had Chris Beaudry on talking about all the events that are coming up. Really looking forward to that also. So the 4th of July here in Wyndham and Willimantic should be a great event for everybody. Looking forward to seeing everybody out there. July 18th is an opportunity for people in the area to come out and listen to and interact with a number of different local, state, and federal candidates. And this is going to be at the Vineyard at Hillyland in Scotland. It's an event that's called Evening Under the Stars from 6 to 9 p.m. on July 18th. You can find information about that on social media if you are interested. And there's a link that's available on social media also to purchase tickets to that. One of the things that I wanted to make sure that I touched on here with our second segment of Right Now is a report that came out last week in Realtor.com. And this was a report that evaluated the affordable housing state by state in the United States. There's two components to this that I want to make sure that we're very clear about. First is Connecticut's ranking compared to other states within the United States. According to Realtor.com, in this report that ranks how affordable housing is in each state, we ended up 46th out of 50 states in affordability. Realtor.com gave the state of Connecticut a grade of an F. Clearly, one of the big pieces of legislation that came out of not only the 2025 legislative session, but also the 2026 legislative session was the state's work on affordable housing. We've talked about this a number of times on this show. We've gone through the history of 830G, which was the original mandate from the state to local municipalities trying to set a standard for percentage of affordable housing available within the state of Connecticut. One thing that I haven't touched on this in previous episodes is how that number is delineated and how they come up with the number of 10% associated with the 830G mandates. One of the unfortunate things is that not all of the housing and rental units are actually included in the computation of that number. And what I mean is that the affordable quota for housing units only counts for this 10% threshold in 830G with government-subsidized housing units that were built after 1990. Older housing units, other types of properties that could provide affordable housing are not necessarily included in this computation. So we can have a very difficult time in many of our towns with achieving that 10% threshold. And when you do not achieve that 10% threshold, you then are not eligible for a significant amount of funding at the state level. They're really looking for a threshold that each municipality has to achieve in order to be eligible for a significant amount of public funding with this. That's a concern because it does not look at the full market of affordable housing as we should. And one of the things that I saw just a few weeks ago, and I think that I mentioned this on a previous episode, was I happened to be down along the shore in Old Lyme. And as I'm driving through Old Lyme, I see a prospective development going in. This is at the point where there was only a developer sign up at the edge of the property on the roadside, and it listed lots available. And it said that there were, I want to say, 10 lots available in this subdivision. The starting price for a lot was $1.125 million for only the lot, not even the construction, building costs, house, anything on it. There are other significant fundamental issues at work here. Besides extremely high lot prices, we have a finite amount of buildable, developable land left in Connecticut. When you add on top of that restrictive zoning, building costs that far outpace the cost of inflation or the rising cost of materials, it makes it unaffordable for middle-income homeowners. Now, what stands in the way of affordable housing in Connecticut? Because one of the things that I've said again in previous programs and multiple times is that the only way that the government can create affordable housing or make housing more affordable is by subsidizing it. And that takes away the capitalist market that truly is home ownership. One thing that I've said over and over again in my past history is that for 3 decades working as a first responder, I worked in some of the most impoverished areas in Connecticut. I've worked in Danbury, I've worked in Bridgeport, I've worked in Waterbury, and I worked for most of my career as a paramedic in Willimantic and Wyndham. In all of these cases, the one thing that I can say about the lower income rental properties that I would on occasion have to respond to is that many of these facilities, even ones that were just rebuilt, just modernized, just rehabbed, in a very short amount of time, these properties fall into disrepair and decay. Part of it is because we have an environment that encourages out-of-state investors, out-of-state developers, out-of-state property owners to capitalize in this market. We also have a situation where we have management companies in Connecticut that do not live up to their end of the bargain, and that is something that we do have control over legislatively. But when you look at a free market, we really have to do everything we can to try and encourage the best outcomes for people to get into this market share. And what I mean by that is that we should be doing things to promote home ownership by simply putting in developed and rehabbed properties around the state of Connecticut that municipalities can pick up and try and develop for affordable housing. We still are not getting to the really basic tenet of the housing market, which is home ownership. That is the greatest opportunity for generational wealth, is being able to own your own property. Now, unfortunately, in Connecticut, one of the things that makes this even more difficult is that you don't have to just take into consideration your ability to pay for a mortgage and then your utility costs, which are continually rising in Connecticut. But then we have the case of property taxes, where you are getting to the point in Connecticut where it is literally a second mortgage on your home having to pay property taxes. One thing that I want to say about that is that a town or a state that is dependent on property taxes for its survival has one of two issues: an extremely bloated bureaucracy that takes too much money from its taxpayers, or there's massive amounts of fraud involved. And in Connecticut's case, I'm going to say that it is absolutely a combination of both. When we look at how the state has forced mandates and costs, whether it's in our school systems or directly onto our municipalities, we are in a position where significant increases in property taxes are going to push people out of their homes. People who are on fixed incomes cannot all of a sudden have a property tax increase of 10 or 15 or 20% year after year after year and not feel that it is something that is unsustainable. Absolutely, Connecticut has an affordability issue. It doesn't just come from all the reports that I have outlined in previous episodes of Right Now. It doesn't take really anybody to look far to find someone who is saying, you know what, I can't afford to pay all these bills and my groceries and support things for my family and then have enough to save or to put into a rainy day fund in case something happens. It is becoming very difficult for people to do that. We see this statistically over and over again as not only the number of people who are leaving Connecticut for better opportunities in other states that are less expensive and the cost of living is low, but we also see this in the fact that we are not attracting businesses here where they see this as a viable place for a company to not only be able to run their business, but also to have a reliable workforce that can keep this business afloat. A few other things that I want to say about this Realtor.com report, and then we'll move on here. I have also spoken in previous episodes about the role of nonprofits in Connecticut. No doubt there are many, many nonprofits that do an excellent job. However, there is also an element to the nonprofit industrial complex in Connecticut, one of these being the nonprofit housing, affordable housing industry, that has really recognized that this is something they can create as a crisis, which typically Connecticut does. They scream from the rooftops, this is something we need to do something about right away before it reaches epic proportions. And the way that that's going to be done is funded by the taxpayer. I want to highlight one of these nonprofits that I've done a little bit of research on, and this is called the Partnership for Strong Communities. According to their website, they have received more than $2.6 billion in public funding since they were founded in 1998, yet we are still 30 years later, and now we are having this huge crisis. Think about the impact of that. $2.6 billion in public funding to a nonprofit over the past 30 years, and it has not shown any improvement in the state. One of the big concerns that I found out is that, as with a number of nonprofits in Connecticut, they have extremely high overhead and management costs. In fact, when you look at this particular nonprofit, 55% of their funding goes to management. I find that totally unacceptable. If you are a nonprofit, you need to be audited regularly. You need to be held accountable for how this public funding is being used. And to say that more than half of the money that you take from taxpayers is simply management and administrative costs is unacceptable to me. That's something that has to change, and I've said this over and over again, and I'll keep saying it. We need to look at where our taxpayer money is being spent, and right now we have a single-party rule in this state that does not do that. Audits are regularly failed. The ability to even track once money goes through one nonprofit to a second or a third nonprofit, those type of pass-throughs should not be allowed. One of the things that really concerns me and that we're starting to see is that most of this affordable housing is going to be pushed towards Eastern Connecticut. That is absolutely a plan here, and this is something that we need to look for in the future, is how this is going to affect these communities in Eastern Connecticut. One thing that we have seen that does kind of lend itself towards this is that we really have come to a point in Connecticut where the housing market has become so difficult to both find a house for purchase and find a property for rent. And one thing that I've noticed in Eastern Connecticut, as I've been driving around for the past couple of years, door knocking and making appearances, as I'm driving through, is that I see a number of properties that over the past few years, many of which I know are rental properties, are sitting vacant. And it's in part, in talking to some of these people who own these properties, in part it's because they don't think that it is a good market. I'm going to say there isn't good market reach for right now being a landlord for renting these properties. When someone looks at the possibility that they have a tenant come in, and now with the changes in legislation that are affecting just cause evictions and the ability of a landlord to say, look, I need to have some time to be able to do renovations on my property. That type of thing usually happens between their tenants within a rental unit. You have a small window of time and an opportunity to do renovations, to do improvements, to do fixes. And when those become so overwhelming, as some landlords that I've spoken to and some rental property owners that I've spoken to have indicated, they've simply said, you know what, at this point, I have good tenants in 2 of my 3 apartments. That third one, I'm just going to leave vacant. Whenever the state steps in and says, we're going to take over and we're going to tell you how to do it, there's a certain amount of the people who are going to say, you know what, I'm not going to participate because it does not make sense to me. One of the things that I've also highlighted is that when we put in a developed rental apartment, I'm going to say apartment building, rental property, any type of development like that, one of the stipulations with the new housing legislation that came through in the past 2 years is that a certain percentage of those workforce affordable apartments have to be 30-year deed restricted. That's how this passed through zoning in many of our small towns, is that there were certain give and take aspects of the agreement that allowed this development to proceed. And I'm going to use the example again of in Mansfield, where they have workforce apartments that cannot rent, are considered affordable, but are still extremely expensive by anybody's, appearance. You look at the prices for 1 and 2 bedroom apartments and you're like, how is this affordable for anyone? Those go unrented, while the majority of the development, which is not deed restricted, fills up right away and there's no vacancies available. This indicates to me that there is a flaw in the legislation and in the plans of how we tackle the issues of housing affordability in Connecticut. Some of the things that we absolutely need to do is to vehemently drive down all of the other costs that have been legislated on us. When we look at the cost of electricity, other utilities, home heating oil, propane, when we add all of this up, we have an environment where really no one can look at Connecticut and say, this is a place that is going to be affordable for me to bring my family to and establish a new life with my family, my friends, or just myself in Connecticut. Unless you are making more than $95,000 a year, you have very little opportunity to be able to come into Connecticut and look at a starting home that might be in the $400,000 to $500,000 range. At some point, we have to recognize that this is not something that is going to promote what we need, which is an influx of workforce, a movement of businesses back into Connecticut that can provide good paying jobs. All we're seeing is the reverse. We're seeing all of these businesses and corporations with long histories in Connecticut leaving the state because of overregulation, taxation, and lack of an economic environment that makes sense for that business to then ask people to uproot themselves and come to Connecticut. So I think there's a number of things that we can do in order to make this a better situation. The first is we have to get control of state and local spending. We are sitting now at a point where it is going to be very difficult if there is a significant economic downturn in Connecticut to make up the money that has been there for the past few years through ARPA funding that's going to be done at the end of this year. We can't rely on that any longer. We can't allow for there to be any more increases in our property taxes. And this brings me to another thing that I've mentioned in previous episodes that I want to bring up as a point again. Right now, we are coming into the heat of our election cycle. We're about 5 months away now from our elections. And you're going to start seeing a lot of the election cycle gimmicks coming out. What I mean by this, I've had a bunch of people contact me saying that their public benefits charge on their electric bill all of a sudden was negative. Again, this is a trick that they're trying to get the less informed voters who don't pay attention to the depth of the issues like I necessarily have to, but they pay attention to how it affects their wallet or their purse or their checkbook. And when you open up that electric bill and you see that your public benefits charge has been 25 or 30% of that electric bill for the past couple of years, and let's also keep in mind that in 2024 we were told, hey, this is going to be done May of 2025. It's over. No more public benefits charge. That's what we needed to do is recoup those funds. That continued for another year. That public benefits charge did not go down. In fact, we're only about a week away from the next rate adjustment that's going to be set by PURA. So we will see exactly what's going to happen here. But one of the things that has happened is that money has been put in so that you would see that reflection on your electric bill. There's been a number of these type of gimmicks that have been talked about in the state as to how to make the impact of the costs of living in Connecticut a little bit less because it's an election cycle. One of those is because everybody was upset about the public benefits charge on their electric bill, so you're seeing that. The second is this educational cost-sharing money that was sent back as extra money from the state to the municipalities, to the school districts, and then the one-time money that's being directed to municipalities in Connecticut. Again, these are the gimmicks that we need to be careful about looking for. And the reason that I say this is that as our election season progresses here, I want everyone to be very careful and pay attention to not just the headlines, not just the articles, not just what people are saying, but keep in mind a few factors. Pay attention to who is saying things, who is saying what they want you to hear, and how are they describing it? How are they spinning the sensationalism with maybe the overzealous use of adjectives in describing things that are designed to grab emotion and designed to grab attention? That's what these operatives are trying to exploit. pay attention to sources that they use, and finally ask why at this point certain things are being released and why certain bits of information are going to come out and why things are being teased to the public, such as a negative balance in the public benefits charge on your bill, or the fact that you have now towns that are trying to keep as close as they can to that mill rate that you had last year. They don't want the property taxes to go up. They're trying to keep it as stable as possible. That is an incentive that is being assisted by the state of Connecticut to help lessen the impact during an election cycle. We'll be talking about this again next week, and for the next few months, I'll have some more special guests on. This has been our latest episode of Right Now here on 95.3 FM, 1400 AM, WILI. Thank you, and I'll talk to you next week.